Welcome back to Myth Vision Podcast. I'm the host, Derek Lambert. I have Dr. Darren Slade with me today. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
First time on Myth Vision, I get to take your virginity. But serious note, who are you? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, so people know who you are.
Yeah, my name is Dr. Darren Slade. I have a PhD in the history of religion. So I specialize in the socio-political development of religious and philosophical belief systems, mostly from ancient Mesopotamia, the ancient Near East, all the way up to the Greco-Roman period and the start of the Christian era. That's me.
And you love this stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm also the president of the Global Center for Religious Research, and I am the lead director for the North American Committee on Religious Trauma Research.
Well, I just want to give you a welcome to Myth Vision and welcome everybody in the chat for tuning in. I hope you hit the like button. Be sure to check out the website that I pinned at the top and also vote. Have you or do you think you suffer or suffered from religious trauma? That is in the chat. We'll check the poll out at the end. In the meantime, there's a few website links that I'd like to share with you that are in the description, but to point out, you can go to the general website here about religious trauma. We're going to talk about this here, GCRR. I've actually given us at your conference, I spoke there, and a lot of the stuff on this page, Dr. Slade, I check off, especially this stuff right here. Deep or chronic shame about being personally responsible for Christ's death or being a sinner or not living up to expectations, feelings of unworthiness, being unlovable or bad in some way, rejection of God or in the faith community, lack of self. I mean, all of these, like so many of these things check off. So I hope people will check out your links, go to your website and find out how they could support or even, get maybe help for this stuff. Do you guys offer that?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a ton of resources for people who are current sufferers or survivors of religious trauma, but we also actually certify clinicians all over the world to help train clinicians. That's psychiatrists and psychologists, that's therapists and coaches, and also pastors, ministers, people in professional ministry. We certify them and help them identify the symptoms of religious trauma, help them understand what happens to the brain and the body with religious trauma, what are the contexts, maybe even some of the doctrines that perpetuate religious trauma, and then, of course, the best therapeutic practices.
Okay, everybody knows the links are one of them's pinned at the top. They're down in the description if you're not watching this live now. We also have the Patreon. Look, I've been busting my hump, dropping these Richard C. Miller videos like I promised to my Patreon members, and there are several out already. And I'll let Atheologica Derek Bennett be my witness here. He is highly impressed with the edits and the quality of the content. The only one that is public is this one. I mean, we're talking Everyone's Wrong, Goodbye SBL. That one's already public too. Jesus Fables, Demons Did It, Just Another Demigod, and of course today's live stream. But anyway, I've got, I don't know, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, probably 10 to 12 more videos with him. And then, so yeah, thank you for the Patreon members. And also we have the course website, mvp-courses.com. Several academic courses. You could take 18 lectures with Kip Davis on the real ancient Israelite religions, reading One Eye on Greek poetry and the Gospels with Dennis R. MacDonald. I have a New Testament studies for everyone with Richard Carrier. I've got Creating Jesus on the Gospel of Mark, literally going through the whole Gospel of Mark with James Tabor, the historical Jesus quest, going through the whole history of New Testament criticism and all that kind of stuff with Del C. Allison Jr., ancient Greek mystery cults with M. David Litwa, and we are building onto this. I've got 2 coming out soon with Robin Faith Walsh. I've got 2 more coming out with Egyptologist Kara Cooney. Just stay tuned. I've got several others that I'm also going to be editing and putting up with other scholars. Thanks for all the support. I hope everybody tuning in and hits the like button and enjoys this episode. So, Dr. Slade, we're done with the shameless plugs. Now we get down into the nitty gritty. Is religious trauma real?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's definitely real.
Yeah.
And this isn't just something, some kind of a woke thing either, where we're just being overly fragile either. We have now the empirical data to suggest that certain doctrines and certain religious contexts are in fact debilitatingly harming people.
And so we have some science to back that up, you're suggesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the Global Center for Religious Research, we just conducted the world's very first, most exhaustive sociological study on religious trauma. It took almost 2 years of peer review and revisions, and it was done by an international team of specialists in the field, that's sociologists and psychologists. And when the numbers, we just released the first set of numbers a couple months ago. And the numbers suggest that here in the United States, 1 in 3 US adults have had religious trauma at least some point in their lifetime. And that as many as 1 in 5, or about 20% of the population currently, suffer from multiple debilitating symptoms of religious trauma.
Can you go into some details about what kind of doctrines seem to be the number one red flags for this kind of trauma?
Yeah, there's some surprising things when it comes to the doctrinal parts, and not so surprising things. So things like original sin seems to be at in the top 5 of what we hear the most. This idea that you are inherently evil or inherently worthy of burning in hell. And so there's something that is not right with you, and that is why you tend towards sin. That's why you masturbate at night. That's all these things. And so you're the problem. That seems to be the number one. And, there have been some surprising doctrines, though, things that I didn't anticipate coming up. CNN actually did an article on us not too long ago about rapture anxiety. And what we are finding is that a lot of people who have been taught and indoctrinated with this rapture belief have a lot of trauma and phobias. For instance, people who are afraid of heights because of the rapture, or they're terrified that at any moment Jesus is going to come back and catch them doing something and they won't be raptured. So these doctrines are creating constant pervasive anxiety and depression in people.
I had multiple dreams, and that checks off one of the boxes you have on your website. I had dreams about the rapture twice, woke up crying. One was fire, and I'm going to relate as we go along to kind of give people a connection in some way. I'm certain there are several people watching this who are going to go, yep, I have had this or that or something similar. It may not be identical, but they're going to relate. And I ask the viewers to try to relate and try to see if you fit into this somehow. But fire was coming down, the whole sky was covered in fire, and then it was coming down, and it was going to burn me. And then all of a sudden I disappeared and woke up. There's this guy with a feather pen who's whispering, Derek, everything's going to be okay now. And I'm like, oh, it's Jesus, and I'm good. But then the other one was lightning bolts were striking, and I was in a thunderstorm just sitting on the front porch watching it, and then it hit me, and then I'm like floating up, and I'm looking around, and all these people are connected to lightning bolts. And so those are 2 little dreams that I remember vividly to this day from my rapture days when I believed in the rapture. It's kind of odd, though, that would be one of them. I would have thought hell itself would have been number 1.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely ranks high.
Okay.
Absolutely. The notion that you are at risk, constantly at risk of displeasing or pissing off the man upstairs, and he is going to have it out for you. He's going to punish you. When you have that instilled inside of you, however it comes, whatever direct theological point that it comes in, if that's what you're...
He froze. Bear with us, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, you froze up for a second there, Slade. We missed you.
I'm sorry about that. I saw that.
Something about angering the man upstairs, and then...
Well, so it doesn't matter what theology theological point of entry that fear comes in. When you are constantly under shame and guilt, you're going to end up debilitating a lot of people.
So that's a big one. I mean, I've had issues with all of these. So what else are you hearing? I mean, what are some of the other issues that go along with religious trauma? Because I can't imagine it's just doctrinal. I mean,
No.
okay, yeah, I have this theology in my head of like, I believe that there's something, and you can convince yourself that stuff is true that isn't, hence
Yeah.
heaven and hell, that kind of stuff. But what else plays a role in religious trauma?
Well, it might help to understand what trauma is first. Um, because when we talk about religious trauma, we're just talking about trauma. And this is trauma that has occurred within a religious context. So, trauma is an event or a series of events or circumstances that a person or an individual feels as overwhelming and is disruptive to their nervous system, that then leads to lasting adverse effects on them and their well being. So, for trauma sufferers, you can think of the big ones like PTSD. A soldier goes off to war and gets PTSD after surviving a firefight, right? That could be akin to an altar boy being molested by a priest, or being raped by your dad, and yet your dad serving as an elder at your church and receiving all these accolades and praises from the congregation right before your eyes. It could be getting beat as a boy, as a child, and your parents using the Bible to justify abusing you. So you have the big traumas, right? Things that we typically think of. But trauma can also be a lot more insidious. And that could be things like the doctrinal stuff. So I'm just being told growing up that every sin I do, I'm murdering Jesus on the cross. And that's a big one that we hear a lot of. Or it could just be, and this isn't to minimize the more insidious ones, because the impact is the same in a lot of ways. But it could be growing up, always having to hide your sexuality, that you are a member of the LGBTQ community and you already know that you are going to lose everything and be ostracized and shunned from the religious community. So it could build over time, or it could be one major impactful event.
Wow. Yeah, that seems to be far-reaching, not just limited to religious stuff. Of course, it could be in any type of circumstance. Trauma could be there, but this is religious related that you're actually finding the statistics on. I find this interesting. So you are in communication with several religious people themselves and trying to help ministers and others. How do you think that's going in terms of the impact that that's making amongst the religious?
Yeah, as expected, we're hearing two voices for sure. The one voice is the ultra conservative, religion can do no wrong, Jesus heals everything kind of crowd. And so when we put the numbers out there, when the research comes out and we're talking about this stuff, we definitely get some hate mail and blowback. We're seen as, the Antichrist and this and that. And that's expected. These are already people, religionists and religious ministries that are so entrenched in their way in the status quo that you really can't teach them much anyway. And they're hopefully on the way out. Hopefully those types of mindsets and organizations are dying. The other voice, and this is the good news, is that there are a ton more professional ministers and priests and rabbis who are more and more aware of the possibility of causing religious trauma in their ministry. And so they want to be trauma informed and more aware so that they can prevent it from happening in their own congregations.
Now, personal question. I know there's a level in which you have to cooperate and work with people where they're at. And that's something I try to do as well. But on a personal level, do you feel like in some cases you're up against the wall because they're almost like their creedal confessions, their doctrines, where they're shooting themselves in the foot. Like, hey, I want to prevent trauma, but I have to tell them this message
Yeah.
that's going to create trauma, or you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. I don't know if I'm shooting myself in the foot
well,
or
not you, but if they are,
they
like,
are. Okay.
yeah,
I don't know. I guess the first thing that pops in my head is, what's the alternative? Because we want, if they're going to exist, if they're going to stay in ministry and they have a message that they're going to still preach, then maybe we can help them figure out a way of doing it so human beings aren't getting harmed in the process. And perhaps it does open some doors for critical thinking and re-examining
right.
some of the real toxic beliefs that are out there.
I agree with you. I just kind of wondered if I put myself back in my shoes when I was teaching the Word of God. You talked about the hyper fundamentalist conservative Christian. That was me.
Yep.
That was you. And like, I was like, how's it? I don't know if I would even cooperate with you, because I'd be like, hey, the Word of God says, and like, so I'd go with what I saw the Bible seem to say,
Yeah.
and then read that, and of course be like, all men are liars, God is true. Spare the rod, spoil the child, right? Find ways to still spank. By the way, I used to spank my oldest, and I think that there's impact from those traumatic situations, even with him. And I feel kind of a guilt, but it's a guilt that I know I can't change. I could just be the best dad and the better dad that I can be today. But yeah, like there's a lot of things that came from that kind of lifestyle. I just wondered how that works for you. But I imagine people who are more open to the science, open to the reality that we live in this world. This is a real thing. The Bible does not tell you exactly how to live in every shape, way, or form of your life. That maybe that could make an impact somehow in the religious communities. Because I kind of look at it like, I'm trying to be fair and say, okay, several Christians are obviously far more progressive, far more open-minded to the world around us, and they're not fundamentalist. But do you kind of wonder about the source? Like, do they need that source is the question I keep coming back to in my head anyway.
Yeah. And maybe people will come to realize, if this thing is so pervasive and yet it comes from oftentimes Christian churches, not exclusively, doesn't have to be evangelicals. But if it is in fact coming out of evangelical and conservative or high control religious environments like Catholicism, hopefully people are re-examining and saying, maybe this thing isn't as good as I think it is, as wholesome as I think it is.
Right.
And I'll tell you, when it comes to trauma, being trauma informed, our biggest goal, and this is across the board, we want to let people know that there are resources and help that's out there, that you actually can do something about your trauma. So if you are a pastor and a minister and you still need to preach the word of God, the one thing I hope that they will walk away with is that the Bible and prayer are not ever going to heal the trauma. It is impossible. And it isn't because of an outright denial of miracles and the supernatural. And that may be the case, obviously, from a personal perspective. That's the case for me. But you cannot talk yourself or think yourself out of trauma. You have to see a trauma specialist. And you need to get into things like EMDR or somatic therapy, or things like the psychedelics that are working a lot, psilocybin and ketamine treatments, things like that. Specialized clinicians who are trained in trauma, that's the help you need. You can still go to church, still be a Bible-believing Christian, but go see a trauma therapist too.
What's interesting about what you said is it not just applies to trauma, but if I could tell myself advice when I was younger and I was going to these youth groups, and I've said this publicly, it's personal information, but I'm kind of just this open book because there's so many people when they hear it, they're like, "Ah, that's what I go through too," but nobody's saying it out loud. When I was a young kid going through puberty, sexual sins,
Mm.
pornography, wanting to hook up with a girl, like, doing whatever boy stuff is. And I'd go down to the like little youth group prayer session where they're like, if you need prayers for any sins that you're hiding or you're struggling with or you need help with, and I'd make that shameful walk from the bleachers at my high school where we had this Trojans for Christ thing almost every day. The only reason I didn't go every day is I wanted them to think at least I made it one day without, but it wasn't true. But they weren't doing that. This is what's odd. All of these youth, I mean, we're talking about 30, 50, depending on the day, young teenage people in high school going down there to get prayer and part of this Youth for Christ, Trojans for Christ group. Like very few ever went down there to get prayer for what I'm describing here, sexual sins, and no praying, no amount of Bible research, nothing I could do could get me to stay away or not do that. And if I could give my advice to myself, it'd be like, there's nothing wrong with this.
Yes.
Like tell myself, like convince myself to not live in that insanity for years of abuse in my mind about this worldview, letting God down, not living up to his expectations. Am I really his son? Am I really a child? Am I going to be going to heaven? Am I going to go to hell? The list goes on. And I mean, it was just living in the flesh, right? So that was that worldview. But it's hard to know, like, here's your Bible, and then here's what you naturally are prone to do. And I struggled with that forever. It's just insanity.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the case across the board is you're never good enough. And the thing, either you yourself or the things that you do are just so bad.
Yeah.
And you're the problem. I relate to that. I'm a survivor of extreme childhood abuse, and I have what's called complex PTSD because of the prolonged exposure to violence and abuse as a child. What we now know is that trauma survivors have certain symptoms, and this can reflect your four responses to life and death situations, right? Your fight or flight, or your fawn, or your freeze modes. And when people get triggered by things, they respond automatically in one of these four ways. So the fight mode, people lashing out in the anger, right? It looks like rage, and it looks like people just have an anger problem, or they bottle themselves up and they seclude themselves and they cannot break out of it. So it just looks like chronic depression, or just looks like they're antisocial, things like this. And what we now know about trauma is that this is actually memory tissue in your nervous system. It is literally a part of your nervous system. And in fact, your body is working correctly. So there's nothing wrong with you when you're lashing out and going through this, when you're having a triggered response, when you're being activated. Your body is doing exactly what it needs to do because it thinks it's in survival mode. And for me, when I would get angry at something stupid, and then I would go pray, and I would read the word, and I would meditate, or I would fast, year after year after year, struggling, and the shame and the pain of always going, how come the Holy Spirit hasn't healed me yet? How come is my faith not great enough? Have I not tithed enough? And realizing that the prayer and going to church and all that stuff was never going to heal the trigger responses.
Right.
I need to actually get into therapy and work on the nervous system. So just, relating, there are things that aren't going to change through, potions and magic spells.
Yeah. And that's so it's like, how come I'd ask those questions like, why? Why can't this just stop? Why can't I just pray and it goes away, or just it's, and it was like I was fighting against what was totally normal, which is making me kind of wonder, like, I love what you're doing. You're trying to help really reduce harm and help people to get better in life. But this is kind of why Myth Vision has evolved to what it is, because it's part of me wrestles with saying, have your beliefs. I'm not here to change your beliefs. I can't, like, that's not my goal, to be able to enter into your house and say, all right, no more.
Right.
That's not my goal. But part of me wants to go, how do you not see the inherent evil of some of the stuff that is in this book that you're wanting to somehow reinterpret or translate or whatever into it, make it better? But then there's some things that they don't, and they just accept and think that that's really true, like original sin we talked about, or whatever it might be. I wrestle between the human empathy and meeting people where they're at, and just going, you don't need this. Like, they may have used it. Part of our evolution is the thing that we've come up with religions that systematically unite us and give us laws and codes and how to live, what to do. We don't need this, is kind of how I feel like screaming it from the rooftops. And once you figure that out, you're like, whoa, I'm even happier now than I ever was. I feel more fulfilled than I ever was. Why did we do this to ourselves? So anyway, there's my little
yeah, it's actually so much about our psychological evolution as a species that are carryovers, right? They're leftovers from when a pre-scientific and prehistoric age, when our lizard brain still acts like the lizard brain, and it's not very well adapted or conducive for modern living. And I would say that that definitely plays a role in things like religion and superstition. It's a carryover for sure. And what we're finding is it does do an incredible amount of harm for a lot of people.
So you saw my little presentation at your conference that you had,
Right.
and was talking about the science behind this. And as far as GCRR is concerned, you're specifically targeting trauma in people, specifically religious trauma. Maybe you do more than that. But in what way would you say some science plays a role in our understanding of the religion and what we've learned about humans and stuff? Can you take us into the sciencey side of all of this a little bit?
Yeah, actually, and thankfully, we have a growing amount of data, of publications and research out there on mental health and religion. So it is very true that religion can, in fact, be a very positive thing psychologically. So we do know that people who routinely meditate or pray and go to church and have that community tend to have lower blood pressure, live a little bit longer, don't have as much suicidal ideations. But that doesn't tell the whole story either. We do know that certain contexts, religious contexts, and belief systems, what we might kind of call high control environments, where think of like maybe purity culture, right? Those types of high control environments are in fact going to be extremely toxic. We know that religion does not seem to stop racism, doesn't stop premarital sex or teen pregnancy, and kids who are indoctrinated throughout most of their childhood don't seem to fare as well as adults who have the ability or have been exposed to more critical thinking and education. And so you get both a mental stuntedness, an intellectual stuntedness, where they're not being trained to critically think things or to question stuff. And you're also being told to hand everything over to God, or if you are depressed or feeling anxious, it's because of your own sin. It's just God, the Spirit convicting you. That easily leads to maladaptive behavior later on in life.
Now, have you had any cases of atheists? I'm curious to know who might have trauma through the idea of nihilism or something like they have no meaning or purpose and they feel like I need a myth, I need a story. I feel traumatized by the constant rhetoric of there's nothing and there's no purpose, there's no, whatever. Have you had
Right.
anything like that?
No, not, but we're also not looking for that because that wouldn't be within the scope of religious trauma. We have a
Right,
ton of atheists. We've encountered a lot of atheists who used to be believers and they've been traumatized. And so they've deconverted.
right,
But keep in mind, trauma can happen anywhere
true.
and everywhere. So it's not just, religious trauma isn't just some unique little mysterious phenomenon. um, Trauma happens everywhere to a lot of people. And so, yeah, I can imagine that there probably is some atheist or secular humanist out there who's been traumatized because of a secular humanist community.
Thank you for that. I wanted to ask you a personal question. I hear you went to a university where Gary Habermas was. Is this true?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. My PhD's in, I studied under Habermas in resurrection apologetics. And it did not take long for me to realize what a crock of shit it was. It didn't take long at all. Um, I'm an academic through and through. I love academia. I love scholarship. And so I read copious amount of publications. And having walked in to my doctoral program thinking the resurrection was definitely an historical event, but then coming to learn that all of the arguments, apologetic arguments in defense of it, was not intellectually honest in the slightest. They committed so many logical fallacies, or they had either minimized or just completely denied the counter evidence, the actual scholarship that's
Right.
out there. And that's how they get away with the apologetic arguments, is just don't expose people to what scholarship actually says.
You ever had any arguments with Gary?
Yeah, two actually. I had two class debates with him. Yeah, and it was interesting.
Yeah, I was reminded. Derek Bennett told me this, and that's why I brought it up. I went to a little Carolina college. It was called Carolina Bible College. They changed it to Carolina College of Biblical Studies in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And I would debate or argue, if you will, with some of these professors. They came from a more Baptist background, and I was becoming Reformed, and I had all these predestination passages that I
Yeah.
was trying to hammer on them. But I was like, we'd also debate the other students. So I heard Derek say you also had that problem as well. You seem to challenge other students while you were there.
Oh yeah, constantly. I was the devil's advocate for sure, and would always point out things. But I got along great with all my professors and my classmates. So it wasn't. Although after one debate I had with Gary Habermas, my classmates actually had petitioned him to have me kicked out of the class, and
Wow.
because they were, he doesn't believe in the resurrection. I can't believe. And that wasn't even actually our debate. Our debate was on the Gospel of Matthew and how Matthew's portrayal of the resurrection doesn't seem to. It's more of a nuanced debate. It was more of this proleptic kind of, I was just tossing out an interpretation, but they were so offended that I did not defend the traditional interpretation of the resurrection from Matthew, that they thought I had no business being in school at all. And he actually had to give a public little statement to the class telling them to chill out. So,
Yeah, he's supposed to be writing some tome of a book coming out on resurrection stuff. And I know that N.T. Wright also, he's written several books as well, and they're all kind of doing similar things in a way. But I just wanted to make that highlight for audience to know that you've been trained underneath these guys and bumped into some of the big apologist names in the Christian community. Um, where do you see GCR are going with this? Do you think at the end of the day, it's just simply trying to target, like you said, traumas and everything? And you're trying to expand beyond just the religious part of it, or what are you aiming for?
Well, our stated mission is academic research on religion. So
Okay.
the religious trauma part is just one facet of the major stuff that GCRR does around the world. We have anthropologists and we have historians and philosophers, and we have counter apologists as well as ministers, people who are writing biblical commentaries and stuff as well. So we do the whole gamut as long as it is academic, would meet peer review. Our stated mission is just to give a platform for scholars because, as you know, especially in some of your recent talks with other scholars, that there are gatekeepers everywhere in SBL and in other places where they kind of prevent a lot of academics and scholars from being able to publish their stuff. And especially if it just doesn't fit their narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And at GCRR, we wanted to turn it on its head and give a platform for scholars and make the research accessible to the general public so that more people can be fed true information, true scholarship, not just what some Ivy League people want you to know.
Yeah, like Dr. Richard Miller in his video that's on Patreon, it's not public yet. His point, I think, in the SBL thing was that they're like inviting everybody and everybody can come. And keep in mind, majority of the students or PhDs who are out there to give lectures are coming from like, I signed a waiver saying I have to be a believer in order to attend this college. And now I'm up here giving a theological lecture that is probably somehow bent in the direction of Jesus really rose from the dead and this is the true faith. Whereas he was interested in trying to get SBL to say, let's have a secular section and a religious one, or a theological one and a historical one. Separate the theology from history because we want the real facts, the data. We aren't interested in your theology mumbo jumbo. And as Dennis R. McDonald said, he considers theology a 4-letter word. And he says, you can keep your theology. I want nothing to do with your theology. I want everything to do with accurate historical research. Give me the scholarship that's not giving me some fluff. And that's his issue with SBL. After 4 hours of talking to the president at SBL on the phone, because that guy contacted him, he realized real quick he's barking up the wrong tree and that there's nothing they're going to do anything about it. So he doesn't think that SBL seems to be fixable as far as he's concerned on accurate, like giving real rigorous, we want to get the facts. They're more into interfaith dialogue and okay, so you come and you present your truth and we'll present our truth and we're all true. And it's like,
yes,
right.
Well, so that's the thing that we're seeing with a lot of academic societies and publishing houses. And this is why GCRR was started in the first place, is academia is incredibly exploitative, especially of the researchers and the scholars doing the groundwork. The reason they're not going to want to break, SBL isn't going to want to make divisions and break things up because it might mean a loss of revenue. It just will be a loss of money for them. They want to keep everybody happy. At GCRR, the only thing that we want to be happy is the truth or facts. And so we've had interreligious dialogue conferences at GCRR and stuff, and we challenge each other. And we want to get up there and say, let's push back now. Let's actually challenge and confront and give counter evidence and counter arguments. So yeah, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I just figured I'd, give a little data backing up what you're saying here. It's not just some conspiracy theory. There's like legit problems all over the board. Is there anything we didn't cover that you really thought I should mention about religious trauma? When we covered doctrine, we discussed, some of this stuff is like physical abuse type situations, sexual abuse type situations. Anything that we didn't mention that might need to be said?
Well, definitely check out our webpage and you can see a lot more of the details and information. Some of the striking things that came out of the report one of them was how many people, and upwards of 11% of the respondents said that they do not have religious trauma, so they don't self-identify as having religious trauma. But then down the line with the follow-up questions, identified for themselves as having extreme multiple lasting effects from religion, anxiety, fear, depression, nightmares, shame. So in other words, upwards of 11% of our respondents actually contradicted themselves. When we asked, do you have religious trauma or have you had it? They say no.
Of course.
But then they say, but I have a lot of anxiety because of trauma, or because of religion, or I have nightmares because of religion. And then you add up all the symptoms and you say, yeah, you have religious trauma. So this required us to explore, why did they not say yes originally? And this is because, and this of course goes for a whole bunch of different professions and avenues in life. Soldiers are notorious for this very thing as well. People don't want to admit that they have trauma. They don't want to admit that something might be wrong.
Like a weakness or something almost.
There's some of that for sure. There is a stigma behind it, or for some people, if they were to admit that their religion has harmed them, what does that mean about their God? What does it mean about their faith? Are they an apostate now? Some might be worried about losing salvation because of it, or losing just their friends and family. I've been in talks. So we have an upcoming religious trauma conference in the beginning of June.
Right.
And we have some wonderful presenters who are who work within the African American community. And it's been really, really enlightening to learn just how taboo it is in the Black community. And we're talking not just here in America. I actually have contacts out in the UK who say it's the exact same thing out there as well. Talking about religious trauma or any type of bad mouthing of religion or God or anything like that is incredibly taboo. And so, of course, you're going to get a lot of people who say, nope, I don't have religious trauma at all, yet they're suffering because of their religion.
This is why I struggle. This is why I want people to see, that they don't need those things, that you could find communities outside that give you as much fulfillment. Sure, they're not going to give you hocus pocus, but you can find other ways, I think, to cope with the world we live in, because sometimes reality sucks. And I get that escape into fantasy land, or giving ourselves hope and beliefs that are just contrary to the reality that we face on a day-to-day basis. I do want to show you something that I figure part of me wants to laugh and part of me feels really sad. Just videos I've been launching lately. A couple of them get a lot of attention, of deconversions of scholars. Bible scholar Richard Miller leaves Christianity. Bible scholar Dennis R. McDonald leaves Christianity. And I get this email, and I just want everyone to kind of see what I got. If I give the guy's email, he emailed me. The subtitle is "Repent or Perish." Okay. Mark, whoever he is, delusional Derek, ... I rebuke you in the name of Yahshua. Now, you can't tell me this doesn't sound a little nutty. I really feel like this is like, anyway, it's pretty crazy. Here's the websites, of course, they're in the description, but like,
yeah,
wow. Because I used to be like that, but
yeah. I got one the other week, and the person hand wrote in there saying, to GCRR, explicitly said, I hope to cause a lot of trauma for people. I hope people are traumatized by the word of God so that they repent and, you're like, man, I know you don't know what you're saying, and you're ignorant as fuck, but man, you're doing so much harm to people out there.
It's like you remember Richard Dawkins opening his mail love letters from Christians.
Yes.
Oh, if you have not watched that video,
Yes.
you want to laugh, watch this video. It's sad, but it's funny at the same time. You're a gaytheist. And like they called him all sorts of weird names, like mocking him, trying to, or I can't wait to be watching from my, what did he,
Yes.
watching from
Right.
my tower in heaven while you brew in God's broth of hell. And like, dude, the imagination on some of these people who hate him because he's just an atheist who's a scientist. And like the kind of like I can't wait to see this. It made me laugh, but it also was like, yep. And this the same thing that recently I told Dennis McDonald, Darren. Dennis McDonald's been living in an ivory tower of scholarship for decades, and at one point he might have been somewhat of a fundamentalist, way back in like the 70s, 60s, but not even on the level that I ever was. And then he's kind of being reminded in his recent avenue, kind of looking through the comment section of his video of his deconversion. He said, man, I've got some wonderful stuff. And then he says, some of these people are the most angry, hateful people I have ever seen. And they're all religious.
Yeah.
You could tell because they mentioned something in their comments. And I said, now you know the war that I'm facing. That's why I said this is war in a video not too long ago, and it got really blown up. Got a lot of Christian apologists jumping. What do you mean war? And the language, no one likes the language of war, but we are in a battle, in a ideology battle that I think if we were able to strip away some of these necessary beliefs, doctrines, and behaviors and habits that come from a lot of these religious contexts, maybe then there'd be a lot less of this trauma that would be coming up.
I think you hit it right on the head there. That's the interesting thing. When we do get some of that fiery, visceral hate mail, you actually may be witnessing a trauma response. They may actually be having a trauma response, and they don't know that they have been traumatized by their religion. And that's the hard part is
Wow. Let that sink in.
These people are hurting.
That's what I told Derek Bennett before we did this stream, because Derek sometimes will be snappy and hardcore and he just doesn't play that crap. And then I caught some slack on a Christian apologist channel because I equated the way and help me, Darren, let's have this conversation. This is important. I see you, Pocket Locker. Thank you for that super chat. We're going to get to you here in a second, my friend. But this is an important conversation. I think we're finally getting into some real meat here because everything we've said is important. But here we're getting down to something that is really my philosophy. I have a recovery channel on YouTube almost 7-8 years ago, coming on 8 years off of heroin. I was injecting heroin and dying from drug addiction. I know what it's like to be trapped and to wake up each day wishing I could stop, but needing that next fix, that next hit. I know what it's like to be traumatized, that an alcoholic father who was abusive as well growing up, but I also know he never meant to do the things he did. He was military, Green Beret, in the Special Forces. He was kicking indoors, jumping from 40,000 feet in the air. He's a medic, Halo instructor, badass. He's Billy Badass. He was a modern day Alexander the Great in my eyes. And, you know, I went through this drug addiction phase and then I exited after over a decade of struggling with addiction. And I started making this little like blog, a little vlog, I mean, like, hey, I'm at day 27. This is what I'm doing. This is how I'm staying clean. You can do it. It's possible. Giving hope. I'd get hate mail saying, you're going to die. You're never going to beat this thing. And then I'd get mostly love. You're encouraging me. If you can do it and you're telling me you really did that, I can make it. And people would get clean. So I saw love and hate. This is 7-8 years ago on YouTube. And over the years, as I started getting clean and keep doing videos, I got hired by a rehab that wanted me to help people to get into treatment. So I started steering people to try and get help, to go get help. And I would talk to someone who'd be withdrawing, or they'd be high at the moment, but they'd be starting to get close to withdrawing off of opiates or whatever might be, meth, heroin, coke, crack, doesn't matter. And I would convince them like, hey, you really need to go check yourself into a detox, get the help that you need. You need it. The next day, as all the chemicals do, they wear off or they need another fix, and they're back out there on the road like nothing ever happened. They ignore the advice, and I'd get frustrated. I'd get really frustrated because I know what they're going through and why they keep doing it and can't stop, but I also know they have to do it if they're going to make it. So I'm like, you're doing it to yourself, but you're also not you're not driving the vehicle.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at the religious people since starting Myth Vision, seeing the communication, seeing the behavior patterns that look all similar to what I'm seeing with drug addiction. And I equate it. I say, I have this empathy part of me that knows that they're struggling or suffering. And I'm not saying everybody is. I can't psychoanalyze everybody, but I see these patterns and these behaviors that mimic what I saw in that addictive behavior I had as an addict. And I sit there and I say, I want to have empathy, even though I think that the worldview is honestly not as pretty as they want to paint it. And they're trapped. The way I put it is they're addicted to Jesus in a way. They're kind of stuck because they don't know there's grass on the other side that's way greener than the grass they think they're seeing.
Correct me if I'm wrong. It seems to be the case that for a lot of addicts, the internal change, that impetus to finally get clean, when it comes from within, it has to come because there's no other option. They've hit rock bottom in a lot of ways. Is that fairly true?
That's my experience. At the end, my vehicle was about to be repossessed. I didn't have any money coming in. My wife kicked me out because we had the Department of Social Services. Someone called in to the social services to have my kids, possibly be taken from the home. So my wife kicked me out of my house. So I'm living couch to couch. I'm literally so bad off. I'm stealing from a pawn shop to pawn it into a pawn shop down the street. I'm panhandling. I'm trying to find ways to get money. Stealing was the most common thing. You find a shed at night. I'll come back at midnight, try and take a backpack blower or a lawnmower. I mean, I can go down into the nitty gritty of addiction and really give you the whole skinny. I got a felony of larceny because of my addiction. At the end, though, I had a probation officer because of that felony. I was supposed to pay back my restitution and stuff and go in and see my probation officer. The wife kicked me out. Vehicle's about to be done. My health is going to shit. I'm miserable. I just made up a story that the dope man's going to do a drive-by on my family if I don't pay him back $140 that I owe him for a whole gram of heroin. I mean, I'm this really not a good person, not doing good. I'm very sick. My mom thought that they were going to kill my family. Like, I'm making up shit.
Yeah.
And it was all of this crumbling down while going through the pain of the withdrawal and stuff and finally committing to go into this lady's house that over the next 2-3 days, everything started to hit me. And it was like, do or die. You either get your shit straight. You either pull your head out of your ass, Derek. I felt like almost like, you ever watch Dragon Ball Z?
No, but I know of it.
There's a scene. I'll give you one scene. One of the more famous scenes. Goku, the main character, who's a Super Saiyan, but he doesn't know he's a Super Saiyan yet. He's just a Saiyan. His best friend, Krillin, gets killed by the arch enemy, which is this Frieza guy, purple god-looking alien. And when he kills his best friend, he knows that he either has to kill this Frieza or Frieza's going to kill everyone he loves. He either is going to do something about it, and it's now or never. And I knew that it was that moment I hit that wall like you're describing, and it was, Derek, die or live. What are you going to do? And so I chose to live, and I chose my next. All I could control was the moment. I couldn't control the hour. I couldn't control the day. They say one day at a time. I couldn't live in the day. I had to live in the moment. And it was one moment to one moment while withdrawing off heroin in the most suffering pain, because I went into acute withdrawal. There's all sorts of things. I tried to pop a Suboxone. It threw me into the worst precipitated withdrawals. I mean, like, it goes pretty bad. So I'm giving vivid detail because I want the audience to know, no shame in my game, open source here, but it's real. I see some of that behavior on the religious side, but I think the same could be said for God. I slowly landed that plane, though. I didn't do or die with God. God became kind of something that kind of dissolved into my, like, it became less relevant as I started to expand my mind and my consciousness and awareness of the world and world religions. That made me go, what is God anymore?
Yeah.
Like, what is this thing I was so obsessed and addicted to that I thought was the only way and the truth? It just stopped being that serious.
Yeah. I'm reminded of the concentration camp prisoner. We don't know who it was, but when he etched into the wall of one of the camps that if God exists, he'll have to beg me for my forgiveness. I kind of wonder if you're right, and that there seems to be an addictive element to it for at least some religionists. If they don't have to hit rock bottom, and the rock bottom being God not showing up, prayer not working, the expectations, standing on his word and whatnot, just not coming through. And that's the rock bottom before they finally, like the concentration camp prisoners, say, I'm done with you. I'm done with
That
you.
is profound, actually, what you said there. Two reasons. It's weird you brought up etched into the wall there, because when I went to my detox a few years before I relapsed again and then really ran my last run in drugs, I went to a detox center and they had a wooden desk there, and there was a man who said, "Hey, I left here a changed man. I can't remember his name. He had a nickname and a date." And then etched under that again, "This shit never changed. I'm insane. I don't know how to stop." And he named himself and dated it. Like he was back again and couldn't stop the thing. But I think that might be true. I would say for most in what you're describing, it took me being hopeless and realizing, Derek, you have to do it. God's not going to do it for you. The two footprints in the sand story, I mention this often. When you were weak, I carried you. That's why you saw two. No, dude, it was you. It was your loved ones around you. It was the people around you who loved you, who cared for you. It was you who cared for you. Those are the real life, real things that helped you. And I gave the credit to God when I first got clean eight years ago, praying and going, please, I can't do it. I don't have the strength, but I found the strength and I kept going. And it was when I looked back in retrospect over that 6 months to a year of getting clean that I realized God had dissolved into this almost imagination in my head where it was like, dude, it's you, Derek. You had what it took, man. Stop taking credit away from the things that you and your loved ones and the people around you. In fact, when we used to go to AA meetings, we had a little slogan for those who were kind of atheists but didn't want to profess it in the AA meeting rooms, because the big book has this chapter to the agnostic, and they want to kind of convince you God's a part of this. That's how you're all getting sober. You can go to NA and find God and all that. God became group of drunks, an acronym for GOD. And so it was the group that kept us sober and clean. It wasn't this divine father in heaven or whatnot, or this abstract metaphysical being floating somewhere around us that is pulling the strings of the universe. It was the group of individual humans and their stories and us as social creatures connecting to them that helped us to get clean. That's why I think what you're doing at GCRR, what we're doing at Myth Vision, creating a community of people that you can connect with, to communicate, to socialize. I have Facebook groups. I am on Twitter, but we also have a Facebook group that's public and we have one that's private. In case you don't want family members seeing your post or anything, go to the private one and join. But like, if it weren't for the groups, I say this as an atheist today, right? I'm self-proclaimed atheist. If it weren't for Alcoholics Anonymous, I don't know if I would have gotten sober and clean. I went there 5 days off heroin, sweat coming out of my hands and just miserable. And I said, crying. I was crying. I mean, I'm like bawling my eyes out, begging people in there, help me, please help me. And this man kind of chuckled. He got me out of my little feel bad for me state for a moment. Then he went, I know how you feel. And he said, young man, you can do this. And like, dude, it was therapy. It was it was a way of me being able to make it, and one day at a time eventually. So we just went into some real shit here on this video.
Well, and you know what? God never showed up to put his hand there and say, I know how you feel. He didn't do that. A human did.
A human did.
And that's the thing is, for a lot of people, you can be traumatized just from having that hope and expectation that God would come and rescue you and help you. And he doesn't. I know that was the case for me. This is actually what I had presented the day after you presented with GCRR. Mine was on, you can be an atheist and still hate God because you had this father figure, this man that was supposed to love you unconditionally and be there for you, and then he didn't show up. And it is like losing a dad. It's like having an absentee, abusive father. Now, you might acknowledge he never existed, of course, but it's real. The belief in him was real, and it trained our body to have this hope. And when he doesn't show up, you get hurt. It's damaging. And I always chuckle at the people that you see online who are constantly praising God and giving him the credit for their wonderful life. Look what God did for me today. Look what God did. And of course, it's always the same people. It's the same middle class, high middle class, white folk, or really successful people. And they don't realize that just doing that can actually harm a lot of other people. Because if God is blessing you and he's giving you all these things, this great success here on earth, what about me? And what about all the people I know who are struggling, who are dying, who are starving to death around the world? They are actually contributing to this pain of I'm not good enough. God must not like me enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that whole that whole thing's pretty bad. Thank you. You helped me find my car keys, Jesus. While some starving kid in Africa literally is dying right now as we speak because they don't have water, they don't have food, or they're dying of a disease, malaria, from being bitten by mosquitoes, something, that science is eventually hopefully going to solve. That's what also blows my mind is how far we've come with correcting illnesses and diseases and death in the world, coming to prevent it, or at least keep it from, prolonging the life so that you're not getting there sooner. Cancer. I just had Gary Stone, a buddy of mine who was an ex-Mormon, come over, and he's a wonderful person. And he's like, Derek, we have now discovered how to target the particular cancer cells, turn them off genetically, so that the mass stops growing, and your body over the coming months will eat that itself. It will eat away the foreign object, and we can turn off cancer now. We know how to do that. What? For thousands of years, Jesus came on the scene. None of that. And if you actually, here's the thing. What's interesting is one could argue, yeah, but that was never the point. Remember, if you love this world, see, here's that horrific ideology again. Yes. Hate this world to gain life. True life is what comes after this, not the one we live now. That is the bubble that I was trapped in. And it was so much worse for me, I feel, in many ways, because I went from escaping this world through drugs and the traumas and reality, and then, of course, sex, this struggle as a youth, then Jesus. And I'd bounce back and forth between addicted to being religious and into the church and the word of God and trying to obsess myself to be as right with God as I could, and then find myself just being a normal boy wanting to go to a campfire where there's some girls, go flirt and have a beer. And the beer turns into, I kissed the girl and we went a little too far on the baseball field there, and I went home run. Okay. And now I'm hating myself, and I might be cooked by this all-loving deity who wants to save everybody, but really is going to burn people who aren't his children where are you going to go with that? Oh, well, universalism. Let's say he burns you for a little bit, spanks you, and then says, come into heaven. Like, that's the most common thing that's starting to come up doctrinally, I find, amongst Christians, is they want to find universalism to make sense, because they realize, I think they're starting to realize more and more how ridiculous the notion really is. So we just covered a bunch of different stuff there. Yeah.
I didn't know if there were any super chats.
Yes, there are.
Is that what the colored chats are?
Yes, sir.
That's really cool.
So we got one back here with Pocket Locker 86J, 2-time PhD biologist, by the way. This guy, he knows about evolution like I'll never know what he knows about evolution, but he's very smart. Great discussion. I was honored to be invited to the GCRR conference. Keep up the amazing work. We are Myth Vision. Jay, love you, man. Keep doing the work you're doing, trying to help wake people up and get people to be considerate about things that we're not used to being considerate about. Socially, he covers all sorts of stuff. Religiously, socially, ethically, politically, all the above. So go subscribe to Pocket Locker. He's almost on every day. And go tell him you came from Myth Vision. M_H, True Habit. When I was a preteen, I disabused myself of the fear and propaganda of the church, went to nihilism for a time, then found the gods of my ancestors who don't punish their kin for disbelief, which I could say the same for my mom. Wish I could say the same. Sorry. Wow. I mean, let me ask you this, Darren. This is something interesting. For me, I feel like I craft a narrative in my head. We're pattern-seeking creatures. We narrate our own story in our own lives. It's totally normal. I think this is the reason we put pen to paper to begin with. I think the reason we wrote stories is our brains work in these patterns. And so I probably feed myself legends and myths of my own to myself. There's no dogma attached to it. It's Derek's own creative, conscious, thing. And I actually, as an atheist, as one who doesn't think there probably is a God, really admire ancestral worship, or at least the honorific motif of looking at our parents and our ancestors and saying, thank you. Thank you for being the human that came before. You know what I mean? There's something cool and noble. I mean, we go and visit the gravestone, right? We go and we want to pay respects. That is a form, I would say, of ancestral worship. And so, I don't know, what are your thoughts as someone who's skeptical like me about that?
These are wonderful brain hacks. That's what they are. It's absolutely okay to do brain hacks to better your well-being. You just don't want the myth to dictate. You need to make sure that you still have that plasticity for your brain, right? The flexibility. So you don't want to get locked into things of good and bad, as in, if I don't do this to my ancestors, or if I don't honor them this way, then this must be bad, because there's so much gray. And nothing's going to kind of fall into that black and white. So that's like with everything. You got a good brain hack and it makes you feel good. Great. If it gets too far and starts taking over your life, not so great.
I love the way you put that. And this is a way of compromise, I think, because so often people think atheist, just anti anything that isn't, and that is not what I want to be seen or known as. When I use the definition, I mean that, and literally, I don't necessarily think there are really a God or gods out there, right? Just by that strict definition, I literally don't think that's true. I think men have constructed it based on our perception. Xenophon, I think it was, or I can't remember the name of the philosopher, once said, if horses could draw images of their gods, they would have the head of horses. They would look like horses. Dogs would make them look like dogs. Well, we have gods that look kind of like us. I wonder why. It's a psychological thing, kind of like a hack of understanding the world. So anyway, I think there's useful tools to create imagination, fiction. We do it with fiction all the time. I love Marvel movies and all the cool stuff. It's not literally true, but it has a truth to it that is of a livable, applicable essence that I could see even when I read the New Testament. There's certain things that I go, I like that. There's some things I go, no, thank you. You know what I mean? Like, so I like what you said there. If it dictates you and you don't have control, then you might want to try something different.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
Okay. Lebowski Jefferson, thank you for the super chat. A pastor's kid for 30 years made this very relatable. Deconstructing was rocky, but juggling life. Arguing with my girl and hiding it from fam is hard. Sorry. Pastor's kid for 30 years made it very relatable. Okay, so I think they're talking about our discussion, made it very relatable. Deconstructing was rocky, but juggling life. So they're still doing it. Arguing with my girl and hiding it from fam is hard. Wow.
Yeah.
So they're in a tough spot right now.
Boy, I can relate to that. I was recently asked if going into the sociology study, if I have religious trauma. And when we first started the sociological project, I did not think I had religious trauma at all. And so the idea and kind of getting the team together started happening just before the pandemic in early 2020. And I had been a closet atheist for a few years, but wasn't able to come out publicly yet. Well, by the time GCRR got started, I was able to come out publicly. And sure enough, I lost everything. Family, friends, my entire support system. My ex-wife at the time had abandoned my 2-year-old and me, and it was just her and me now. So the deconstructing and having to be open about it and then hiding it from your family, it's a nightmare, especially if you run the risk of losing everything and everyone because of it. And so, now definitely recognizing, my gosh, they took off on us and they hate us because of their religion, which now can trigger me sometimes. So I'm right there with you.
I can't relate to they've like totally left me, my family. I got to give them some credit. No matter what they believe, they stuck there and they're still there. And mom will sometimes write a note on my desk. She actually used this book to do it. Oh, here it is. While me and my wife were on our trip to California, I love Jesus, Mom. God is good. Okay. It still happens. I mean, isn't that interesting? Right here on my desk, right here for the video. Perfect timing. Next page is all my Richard C. Miller videos I'm editing. But no matter what, mom will never abandon or leave, even with my disbelief or atheist, whatever, even if she thinks I'm wrong. And I'm like, I had to have that talk once with mom and them. It's like, Mom, sis, all my family that are around, like challenging me on this. I'm like, I've forgotten more about the Bible than you've read or know about it. And it's like, it's weird coming from that position of like someone who studies this stuff and knows this material really, really well compared to you. I could say I know it very, very bad compared to other really, really, really smart people. But, them having such sheer confidence, it's not about intellect. It's about experience. I think it's about that social, I felt Jesus when I heard that song, or it's really them that they think is him. It's really them. And it's the placebo in themselves and all of that going on that I think makes them be convinced, like, this can't be a lie. And I get it, because they haven't figured out how to compartmentalize and recognize they're applying that experience and the feelings to something that isn't really that thing. It's them. Like Darren Brown, the mentalist. Do you ever watch him? He's an atheist. Mm-hmm. How he convinced that one girl who was an atheist that God is real, and then he had to explain to her afterwards. Everything I did, I tapped into real people like your dad, your mom, heroes in your life, and then just one little tweak, and I had you thinking of God.
Interesting.
And he tweaked it all, and he said everything you felt. He told her, as he did it in front of everybody, in front of the audience, everything you felt was real. Every experience, every emotion, all of that's real. I just planted God in there. God was not even needed for any of those things that I did. I just added it in there as an experiment for the show. If you haven't seen that, it's like faith versus something fear. Just type in on YouTube, Darren Brown, Darren Brown, makes an atheist a believer. And then watch her reaction. She gets up after he convinces her, and like he's like, sometimes it's just right in front of your head. And by the way, he's an atheist.
Yeah.
But he's doing it as an experiment for a show. Then he walks off. She stands up looking at the altar, like crying.
Yes.
He comes back and then explains to her later in the episode what happened and how he goes into all sorts of science along the way of doing experiments. One of the experiments he does that I found was interesting is that he walks these people into a room. One set of people, he tells them there's this haunted chair that came from an actual house where it rocks on its own sometimes. Like they made up a BS story about this chair that sometimes there's a ghost attached to it and it might be sitting in it. You never know. Anyway, some weird stuff. Anyway, while I leave, I'll be back. Make sure you move this ring around this, almost like, remember where you do surgery and it buzzes if you hit the wall as a kid when you're trying to take. Well, if it touches, it buzzes. And so the people that were in that room that thought the chair was haunted were 100% honest. Every one of them said how many times it buzzed when they touched. They jotted it down. The people who had no clue about the chair, 3 out of 4 of them lied.
Wow.
So when you tell a lie and make it think someone's watching you when they're not, people were more honest. So he started to show the sociology, the psychology, the science. I'm big into that kind of stuff. I like to understand the mechanics behind why we believe, not just in the Bible it says,
Well, and now couple that in that conditioning, the mental conditioning that's happening. And you couple that with this identity marker, that the belief in God or the love for Jesus is now so integral to your own identity that you are nothing without him.
Mm-hmm.
And you had determined for yourself at an early age or whenever that this was going to be your identity. Trying to have people, expect people to rationalize themselves out or to reason themselves out of that faith, it would be a grave betrayal of their own selves, their own identity, on top of a fear of betraying God and getting punished for it. So, of course, you're not, like your mom isn't going to deconvert because it's integral to her identity.
That's without a doubt. It's like telling it to them, and this is hard to put your shoes in if you're not a believer. It's like telling them to lie to themselves.
Yeah.
Because they're convinced. And that's why I try to be empathetic as much as I can and encourage others to try to as well, because I think it's kind of a human thing. It's a human thing we do. But educating and continuing to do so. GCRR is doing that. Shameless plug again. The links are in the description. Please go check it out. Darren, you've been a fantastic guest. I hope I've been a decent host. I hope I don't, after this, beat myself up and go, have I lived up to his expectations? But if you're struggling, the question is, right? If you're struggling with religious trauma, they can go here.
Yeah. So if you go to gcrr.org/RT, we have a ton of resources. So we have international scholars and specialists who research religious trauma. And if you are somebody who is a survivor or is currently suffering from religious trauma, you can check out our videos. And there you will learn what trauma does to your brain and your body, some of the contexts in which trauma has occurred, and some best option treatments for you. You'll also get a ton of really cool resources. On top of that, if you are a clinician or a coach, or you are in professional ministry, or just somebody who wants to dive even deeper into the hardcore academic stuff, We offer a 32-hour certification, and it is accredited for CEUs, or continuing education units. And that will certify you in religious trauma studies. You get 32 hours of content, international scholars, and over 24 publications on religious trauma for you to dive in deeper. So all you got to do, gcrr.org/RT.
And there's a message us on the bottom right. There's a lot of cool ways to possibly make contact. Check out the resources that Dr. Slade has brought us today. I hope that you'll tap into that. We're going to check and see here in just a second before I shamelessly plug myself. I have a poll, right? And I wanted to see how many people, I asked, do you think you might suffer from religious trauma? There's been 264 votes. I'll give people 10 seconds to vote now. If you're in the chat, go ahead and drop your vote, because I'd like to get that. Let's hit this super chat real quick here by Vesper, and then we'll see how many people voted. Is there maybe an element of self-sabotage going on amongst religious due to low expectations of themselves, original sin, unable to measure up to God?
Well, humans are professional self-saboteurs. So it would not surprise me if, in fact, we see that even with things like porn addiction or drug addiction. You take a hit and you say, well, I fucked up once, I'm just going to go balls to the wall now and just keep on doing it. Right. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I can see part of that self-sabotage among religionists is, I sinned, and so I'm already screwed for today. I will get my sins cleansed later on. So I'm just going to snowball it real quick.
That is, oh my gosh. In addiction, it's the same. I already did it. I'm stuck now. I might as well just go all out, spend all the money I have today. Yeah, there's a ton of that happens. Crazy that you brought that up. Vesper, great question and great answer, Darren. Okay, now we're going with the votes. I'm going to end the poll now. I hope everybody got their vote in. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Do you think you might suffer from religious trauma? We had 273 votes. 53% said yes. 28% said no. And then 17% said, I'm not sure. What do you think of that?
How many votes?
273.
Okay. And 53% said
yes.
Yes. Interesting.
28% said no, and 17% said not sure.
Yeah. It's interesting, when we came out with the study, the number one criticism that we get is that our numbers are too low, and we're purposely being conservative with our numbers because we don't want it to look sensationalist. And so if somebody were to identify that upwards of 50% of the population has religious trauma, I'm not so sure it would be a hard pill to swallow. So yeah.
Wow.
With your particular audience, Myth Vision audience,
yeah.
Definitely there's going to be more in this pool.
I imagine if we sat around more, there would be a lot more people voting. But yeah, I mean, I have people who are on all spectrums of different beliefs and whatnot who watch us, and so there are some who probably didn't, and they found a way to consciously leave the cult. I don't know, whatever the cult might be. Let me go ahead and give a little shameless plug again to point out, do your best not to be this guy. Repent or perish. Delusional Derek. That's a great way to win me to Christ, by the way. Hallelujah. Delusional Derek, I rebuke you in the name of Yahushua. But you could go and support the Patreon. And you can message me in this little messages. You see how I'm so far behind right now? I've got some catching up to do because I'm editing the heck out of these videos with Dr. Richard C. Miller. But you can harass me with your, Delusional Derek if you want to pay a little to join the Patreon. Seriously, though, there's a community here. I'm working my butt off. I've got a lot of content. It costs a lot of money to travel down to California and make this trip possible. You can help support. And as little as $3 a month, you're in the door. You have real salvation. Anyway, help support us if you're interested in doing that. The other way you could do it is take a course or two. We have college level, real academic courses here, 18 lectures with Kip Davis here, 18 lectures with Dr. Dennis R. McDonald. The smaller courses are here, and this is with Richard Carrier on New Testament studies. We have James Tabor here on the Gospel of Mark, Dale Allison Jr. in the history of New Testament studies, pretty much. We call it Jesus Quest. And then M. David Litwa, Ancient Greek Mysteries and Christianity and how there's something to it. But yeah, any words from you, final words, encouraging words maybe from you, Dr. Slade?
Well, Derek, I am very proud of you for what you've gone through and what you've come out of. So thank you for being transparent and sharing your story and encouraging others. Thank you for having me on the show. And to everybody, just keep doing what you're doing. Thank you for bringing actual knowledge and truth out there and being good to each other and to yourselves. Thanks again.
Thank you. I seriously appreciate it. Maybe we'll have you back again in the not too distant future. This has been a long time coming. And never forget, we are Myth Vision.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.